Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live inside a working beehive? Stay with me, because what I'm about to share will completely transform how you see beekeeping forever. For centuries, beekeepers have donned protective suits, braved stings, and worked outdoors in all-weather conditions to harvest honey and care for their colonies. But what if I told you there's a revolutionary way to work with bees without ever stepping outside? What if your home could become a living, breathing partnership with nature itself? Over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to take you inside one of the most innovative approaches to modern ecological beekeeping. We're talking about a specially designed house with integrated hives built directly into the walls, connected to the outside world, allowing beekeepers to work safely and efficiently from within their own home. My name is Thomas, and I've spent the last 15 years working with bees. I've traveled across continents, studied with master beekeepers, and witnessed the devastating decline of bee populations firsthand. What I'm sharing with you today isn't just about honey production. It's about reimagining our relationship with nature, about creating sustainable food systems, and about building a future where humans and pollinators can thrive together. This concept, what we call the Living Hive House, represents the future of ecological beekeeping. It's modern, it's efficient, and most importantly, it's designed with the bees' well-being at the absolute center. But before we dive into the technical aspects, let me tell you a story. 3 years ago, I met an elderly beekeeper named Samuel in the mountains of Slovenia. He was 84 years old, and he'd been keeping bees since he was a boy. His hands were gnarled from decades of work, his back bent from years of lifting heavy hive boxes. He told me something that changed my entire perspective on beekeeping. He said, "Thomas, I've given my life to these creatures. They've fed my family, they've brought me joy. But this work has also broken my body. If I could start over, I'd find a way to work with them, not against the limitations of my own aging frame." That conversation planted a seed in my mind. Why do we accept that beekeeping must be physically demanding? Why do we assume that working with bees requires us to be outside in harsh conditions? Why can't we bring the bees closer to us, in a way that respects both their nature and our own? The answer came when I discovered traditional Austrian and German beekeeping methods, where hives were sometimes built into the walls of barns and homes. These weren't just practical solutions. They were born from a deep understanding of how bees behave and what they need to flourish. But here's what makes the modern living hive house different from those historical approaches. We're not simply inserting a few hives into a wall. We're creating an entire ecosystem, a symbiotic relationship between human dwelling and bee colony, all while maintaining the highest standards of ecological and sustainable practice. Imagine waking up in the morning and, instead of brewing coffee first thing, you step into your dedicated bee room. The walls are transparent sections of observation hives. You can see thousands of bees working, dancing, communicating. The gentle hum fills the room, a natural white noise that's both calming and energizing. You're wearing nothing but your regular clothes. No suit, no veil, no gloves, because the design of this system means you're separated from the bees by specialized glass and carefully engineered access points. You're not disturbing them, you're simply observing, learning, and when necessary, intervening with minimal stress to the colony. This is the reality for a growing number of ecological beekeepers who have embraced this innovative approach. And the results? They're extraordinary. Colonies and living hive houses show reduced stress levels, higher survival rates through winter, and increased honey production compared to traditional outdoor hives. Why? Because the temperature is more stable. The beekeeper can monitor for problems daily without invasive inspections, and the bees themselves benefit from the protected environment while still having complete freedom to forage outside. But let's address the elephant in the room. You might be thinking, isn't this unnatural? Shouldn't bees be outside in nature? Here's the truth that might surprise you. While bee colonies naturally seek out protected cavities, hollow trees, spaces within rock formations, anywhere that offers shelter from the elements while providing access to the outside world. In many ways, a well-designed wall hive mimics these natural conditions more closely than a traditional wooden hive box sitting exposed in a field. The key, and this is absolutely critical, is in the design. A living hive house isn't just a home with some bees stuck in the walls. It's an architectural collaboration between human needs and bee biology. Every aspect is carefully considered, from ventilation systems that prevent moisture buildup, to entrance tunnels that maintain the bees' natural climate control, to observation windows that allow monitoring without disruption. Let me walk you through what a typical living hive house looks like. Because the design is where science meets innovation. The southern or southeastern wall of the house, the one that receives the most sunlight, is where the primary hives are located. This isn't random. Bees are solar-powered creatures. They need warmth to become active, and morning sun on the hive entrance stimulates foraging behavior. Each hive is essentially a module built into the wall structure. From the outside, you see a small landing board and entrance hole. Just like any traditional hive, the bees fly in and out completely freely, accessing the same flowers, trees, and plants they would visit from any outdoor hive. But here's where it gets fascinating. That entrance leads to a tunnel system, about 12 to 18 inches long, that passes through the wall. This tunnel serves multiple purposes. It maintains the microclimate the bees need. It provides natural pest control because varroa mites and other parasites struggle in these longer entrance systems. And it creates a buffer zone between the outside world and the interior hive space. On the inside of your home, in the dedicated bee room, the back of each hive module is accessible through a series of doors and windows. These aren't just simple openings. They're precision-engineered access points with multiple layers. The first layer is observation glass, thick, insulated, allowing you to watch the colony without any disturbance. You can see the queen laying eggs. You can watch the workers building comb. You can observe the entire life cycle of the hive without ever opening anything. Behind the observation glass is the working access panel. This is open only when you need to perform hive management, add frames, check for disease, or harvest honey. When you open this panel, you're working in a completely controlled environment. The room temperature is comfortable for you. There's excellent lighting, and you have all your tools within arm's reach. Now, you might wonder about bee escapes. What happens if bees get into your living space? The design prevents this through a series of barriers and a clever understanding of bee behavior. Bees don't randomly wander. They're purposeful creatures. When you open the access panel to work, you're opening it into a dedicated room that has its own separate ventilation. Any bees that might escape the immediate hive area can be easily guided back or allowed to exit through a one-way escape system. In 15 years of working with and studying these systems, I've learned that bee escapes into living spaces are incredibly rare, far less common than wasps or flies entering a traditional home through an open window. But the living hive house concept goes beyond just the physical structure. It represents a philosophical shift in how we approach beekeeping and animal husbandry in general. Traditional beekeeping, even when done with the best intentions, is extractive. We take the bees' honey. We manipulate their breeding. We move them around for pollination services. We treat them as agricultural machines rather than as the complex, intelligent superorganisms they truly are. Ecological beekeeping in a living hive house flips this dynamic. Yes, we still harvest honey, but we do it with a level of awareness and respect that's simply not possible when you're working outside in protective gear, rushing to close up the hive before the bees become too agitated. When you can observe your bees daily, you develop an intimate understanding of their needs and rhythms. You notice when a colony is preparing to swarm days before it happens, allowing you to make decisions that benefit both you and the bees. You see when food stores are running low and can provide supplemental feeding before the colony becomes stressed. You witness the miracle of a new queen emerging, taking her mating flight and returning to lead her family. This isn't just beekeeping. This is relationship building. And here's something beautiful that I've observed in every single person who transitions to this system. They become better beekeepers. Not because the system is easier, though it is, but because the daily intimacy with the colonies creates a depth of knowledge that years of traditional beekeeping might never achieve. Sarah, a bee pie in Vermont, told me that after installing her living hive house, she finally understood what the old books meant by reading the bees. She could see the subtle changes in behavior, the shifts in activity patterns, the early warning signs of problems. She prevented 3 colony collapses in her first year simply because she noticed things early. Let me share something that might shock you about modern commercial beekeeping, because understanding the problem helps us appreciate the solution. In industrial beekeeping operations, hives are often treated like disposable units. Colonies are pushed to their limits for honey production or pollination services. They're fed sugar syrup instead of their own honey. They're treated with chemicals for pest control. And when a colony dies, which happens frequently, it's simply replaced. The average lifespan of a commercial honeybee colony in industrial agriculture is just 1 to 2 years. 1 to 2 years. In nature, in truly healthy conditions, a bee colony can thrive for decades. This isn't sustainable, it's not ecological, and it certainly isn't ethical. The Living Hive House approach is the antithesis of this model. These colonies are partners, not resources. The goal isn't maximum extraction. It's optimal health and longevity. And surprisingly, when you prioritize colony health, honey production actually increases over the long term. My colonies, the ones integrated into my own home in the mountains of Oregon, are now 7, 9, and 11 years old. The same queens, the same genetic lines. Thriving year after year. They produce more honey now than they did in their first years because they're strong, healthy, and unstressed. This is the power of working with nature instead of against it. Now, let's talk about something crucial. Something that every prospective living hive house keeper needs to understand. This system requires commitment education. You cannot simply build hives into your walls and hope for the best. You need to understand bee biology, seasonal patterns, disease management, and sustainable practices. The barrier to entry isn't financial, though there is investment required in proper construction. The real barrier is knowledge. But here's the incredible part. Because you're working with your bees daily, in comfort and safety, the learning curve is actually shorter. You're not trying to remember what you read in a book while standing in a field wearing a hot suit with bees buzzing around your head. You're calmly observing, taking notes, researching, and applying that knowledge in real time. I run workshops now, teaching people how to design and build their own living hive houses. The participants come from all backgrounds. Retired teachers, young families, software engineers looking for a connection to nature, even other farmers wanting to diversify their operations. What they all share is a desire for something more meaningful than conventional agriculture offers. They want to be part of the solution to pollinator decline. They want to produce their own food sustainably. They want to live in harmony with nature, not in dominion over it. And I'll be honest with you, it's not always easy. There are challenges. Building codes in some areas don't account for integrated hive systems. Neighbors sometimes have concerns about bees. The initial construction requires careful planning and skilled execution. But every single person who has completed a living hive house project tells me the same thing. It's worth it, absolutely worth it. Let me tell you about Marcus, a beekeeper from Colorado who built his living hive house 3 years ago. Marcus had kept bees traditionally for over a decade. But he was getting older and the physical demands were becoming too much. He was considering giving up beekeeping entirely. Then he discovered this concept. He spent 6 months researching, planning, and building. He integrated 4 hive modules into the south wall of his workshop. The first year was a learning experience. Adjusting ventilation, fine-tuning access points, understanding how the bees adapted to their new home. By the second year, something remarkable happened. Marcus's colonies outperformed every traditional hive in his area. They survived a particularly harsh winter that killed 40% of the outdoor hives in his region. They produced more honey. They showed no signs of common diseases that plagued his neighbor's bees. But more than the practical success, Marcus told me something that really captured the essence of this approach. He said, "I fell in love with beekeeping all over again. I thought I knew bees, but now I really know them. They're not just insects in boxes anymore. They're my partners, my teachers, my connection to something bigger than myself." This emotional transformation, this deepening of relationship, happens to everyone who embraces this system. And it extends beyond just beekeeping. Many living hive housekeepers find themselves becoming more conscious about their entire lifestyle. They plant more flowers, they eliminate pesticides from their gardens. They become advocates for pollinator protection in their communities. The bees become a gateway to broader ecological awareness. And here's something powerful. When your neighbors see your success, when they taste your honey, when they witness your passion, they become curious, they start asking questions. They begin to reconsider their own relationship with nature. I've seen entire neighborhoods transform because one person built a living hive house. Community gardens sprout up. Native plant landscaping replaces sterile lawns. People start talking about sustainability, about local food systems, about taking responsibility for the environment. This is the ripple effect of ecological beekeeping. It's not just about honey, it's about changing consciousness one colony at a time. Asterisk, have you ever wondered what would happen if bees disappeared tomorrow? Stay until the end of this presentation because what I'm about to reveal will completely change the way you see your breakfast, your garden, and the very survival of humanity. In the next hour, we're going to explore the hidden world of pollination, discover what would happen in just 30 days without bees, and understand why these tiny creatures are literally holding our entire food system together. So let me continue where we left off. We were talking about sustainable beekeeping practices. But now I want to shift gears and take you on a journey that begins right at your breakfast table this morning. Think about what you ate. Maybe you had coffee with a splash of milk. Perhaps some toast with jam. Maybe an apple or a bowl of yogurt with berries and almonds. Now, let me tell you something that might shock you. Without bees, most of what was on your plate this morning wouldn't exist. I know that sounds dramatic. I know it sounds like an exaggeration. But I'm going to prove it to you, step by step with real science, real data, and real stories from the field. And I promise you, by the time we finish this hour together, you'll never look at a bee the same way again. Let's start with something simple. An apple, beautiful, crisp, sweet. You bite into it and you taste autumn. You taste orchards, you taste nature. But the apple exists because a bee visited a flower. Not just one bee, actually. It takes multiple visits from multiple bees to properly pollinate an apple blossom and create a fruit that's worth eating. Without those visits, the flower withers and dies. No fruit, no apple, nothing. Now multiply that by every fruit and vegetable that depends on pollination. Almonds, every single almond you've ever eaten exists because a bee pollinated an almond blossom. 100% of almond production depends on bee pollination. Blueberries, cherries, cucumbers, melons, pumpkins, strawberries, tomatoes, the list goes on and on. Roughly 1/3 of all the food we eat depends directly on pollinators, and bees are responsible for the vast majority of that pollination. But here's where it gets really interesting. And this is something most people don't understand. Pollination isn't just about fruits and vegetables that we eat directly. It's about the entire food chain. Think about beef. Think about chicken. Think about dairy products. The animals that produce these foods need to eat too. And what do they eat? Alfalfa, clover, other forage crops. And guess what pollinates those crops? Bees. So when we talk about bees sustaining your breakfast, we're not just talking about the obvious things like the berries in your yogurt or the apple on your plate. We're talking about the milk in your coffee, the butter on your toast, the cheese in your omelet. All of it traces back to pollination. All of it traces back to bees. Now, I want you to imagine something with me. Close your eyes for a moment. Or if you're watching this, just try to visualize what I'm about to describe. Imagine it's a perfect spring morning. The sun is rising over an almond orchard in California. Thousands of trees stretching as far as you can see. Every single tree covered in white and pink blossoms. The air is filled with the most incredible fragrance, sweet and delicate, and everywhere you hear the sound of bees. Millions of them, working, visiting flower after flower, collecting pollen, spreading it from blossom to blossom, creating life. This scene happens every single year, and every single year, beekeepers from across the entire country truck their hives to California for almond pollination season. It's the largest managed pollination event in the world. Over 2 million bee colonies, representing more than 30 billion bees, all working together to pollinate almond trees. Asterisk, but what I'm about to tell you next will absolutely blow your mind. Keep watching. The relationship between bees and flowers is not just convenient. It's not just useful. It's one of the most sophisticated partnerships that evolution has ever created. And it goes back millions of years. Long before humans walked the earth, bees and flowering plants were already working together, evolving together, shaping each other's development in ways that scientists are still trying to fully understand. Flowers have evolved to attract bees. They've developed colors that bees can see, patterns that guide them to nectar, fragrances that signal when they're ready for pollination. Some flowers have even evolved shapes that perfectly match the body of specific bee species. It's like a lock and key. Only that particular bee can access the nectar, and in doing so, it picks up pollen that it will carry to the next flower of the same species. And bees, in turn, have evolved to work with flowers. They've developed specialized body parts for collecting pollen. They've learned to see ultraviolet patterns on petals that are completely invisible to human eyes. They've created complex communication systems to tell other bees where the best flowers are located. They've built entire societies around the collection and storage of nectar and pollen. This is cooperation at its finest. This is nature working in perfect harmony. And we as humans are the beneficiaries of this ancient partnership. Every time we eat a meal, every time we enjoy fresh fruit, every time we spread honey on our toast, we're participating in a system that has been perfected over millions of years. But here's the problem. And this is where our story takes a darker turn. This ancient partnership is breaking down. Bee populations around the world are declining at alarming rates. In some regions, we've lost 40% of bee colonies in just the last decade. 40% gone. And the remaining colonies are weaker, more vulnerable to disease, less productive than they used to be. Why is this happening? Well, there's no single answer. It's a combination of factors. Pesticides are killing bees directly or weakening their immune systems. Habitat loss means there are fewer flowers for bees to forage on. Climate change is disrupting the timing of flower blooms and bee activity. Parasites and diseases are spreading faster than ever before, and industrial agriculture practices have created environments where bees struggle to survive. I've seen this firsthand. I've visited farms where every bee colony looked healthy and strong, and then 6 months later, half of them were dead. I've talked to beekeepers who have been working with bees for 30, 40 years, and they tell me they've never seen anything like what's happening now. The bees are struggling, and when bees struggle, we all struggle. So let's do a thought experiment together. Let's imagine what would actually happen if bees disappeared. Not gradually over decades, but suddenly. Tomorrow morning, you wake up and every bee on Earth is gone. What happens next? Asterisk, and trust me, what I'm about to describe is more terrifying than any horror movie. Stay with me. Day 1. Most people wouldn't even notice. Life would continue as normal. Your refrigerator is still full of food. The grocery stores are still stocked. Everything seems fine. Day 7. The first signs start to appear. Farmers who depend on bee pollination for their crops start to panic. Apple orchards, strawberry fields, almond groves, all sitting there with flowers that will never be pollinated. Agricultural experts start sounding alarms. The news begins to cover the story. But still, most people aren't worried. There's still food in the stores. Day 15, prices start to rise. Almonds become 3 times more expensive overnight. Fresh berries are suddenly a luxury item. Apple juice disappears from shelves because there's no new crop coming. But it's not just the obvious things. Beef prices start climbing because cattle feed is becoming scarce. Day 20, the reality starts to hit home. Grocery stores have empty sections. Fruits and vegetables that were once abundant are now rare and expensive. Restaurants are changing their menus, eliminating dishes they can no longer prepare. Food manufacturers are scrambling to reformulate products because key ingredients are unavailable. The economy is starting to feel the pressure. Day 30. This is where things get truly serious. We're not just talking about inconvenience anymore. We're talking about genuine food shortages. 1/3 of our food supply is directly impacted. Malnutrition rates begin to climb, especially in vulnerable populations. Children, elderly people, those living in poverty. The social fabric starts to strain under the pressure. But let me be clear about something. This isn't just a theoretical scenario. This is a very real possibility if we don't act now to protect bee populations. And the scary part is, we're already seeing the warning signs. We're already experiencing the early stages of what could become a catastrophic collapse. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Can't we just pollinate crops by hand? Can't we develop technology to replace bees? Well, let's talk about that for a moment. Hand pollination is possible in some parts of China, where bee populations have been decimated by pesticide use. Farmers are already doing this. They climb ladders with brushes and manually transfer pollen from flower to flower. It works, but it's incredibly labor-intensive and expensive. One person can hand pollinate what thousands of bees can do in a day. The cost of food produced this way would be astronomical. Most people simply couldn't afford it. What about robot bees, drone pollinators? Scientists are working on this. There are prototypes, but we're decades away from having anything that could operate at the scale needed to replace natural pollinators. And even if we could create such technology, the cost would be prohibitive. Nature provides pollination services worth hundreds of billions of dollars every year, absolutely free. Trying to replace that with technology would bankrupt our agricultural system. The truth is, there is no replacement for bees. There is no backup plan. We need them. They are irreplaceable. And that's exactly why we need to do everything in our power to protect them. So what can we do? How do we reverse this decline? How do we save the bees and, by extension, save ourselves? This is where modern, ecological beekeeping comes in. This is where the conversation shifts from doom and gloom to hope and action. Because there are solutions, there are practices we can implement right now that will make a real difference. First, we need to understand that conventional industrial agriculture and healthy bee populations cannot coexist in their current forms. The heavy use of pesticides, the monoculture farming practices, the elimination of wildflower habitats, all of this is incompatible with bee health. We need to transition to ecological farming methods that work with nature instead of against it. Organic farming is a huge part of the solution. When farms eliminate synthetic pesticides and herbicides, bee populations thrive. I've seen this transformation happen. I've worked with farmers who made the switch from conventional to organic, and within 2 years, their land went from being nearly devoid of pollinators to being absolutely buzzing with life. What happens next in this transformation is absolutely remarkable. Regenerative agriculture takes this even further. It's not just about eliminating harmful chemicals. It's about actively rebuilding ecosystems, planting hedgerows filled with native flowers, creating pollinator corridors that connect different habitats, maintaining diverse crops that bloom at different times, providing food for bees throughout the growing season, using cover crops that bees can forage on. I've visited regenerative farms that look completely different from conventional operations. Instead of endless rows of a single crop stretching to the horizon, you see diversity, you see life. You see flowers blooming between crop rows. You see hedges and trees providing shelter and food. You hear the constant hum of bees and other pollinators doing their work. And here's the amazing part: these farms are often more productive and more profitable than their conventional counterparts. Why? Because when you work with nature, nature works with you. Healthy soil produces healthier plants. Diverse ecosystems are more resilient to pests and diseases. Pollinators ensure better crop yields. It's a positive feedback loop. Everything reinforces everything else. But this transformation doesn't just happen on farms. It needs to happen in our cities, in our suburbs, in our own backyards. Every single person can contribute to saving the bees. And it starts with simple changes in how we manage the land around us. Stop using pesticides in your garden. I know it's tempting to spray something when you see aphids on your roses or ants on your patio. But those chemicals don't just kill the pests. They kill bees, they kill butterflies. They poison the entire ecosystem. There are natural alternatives for almost every pest problem. Companion planting beneficial insects. Organic sprays made from soap and water. These methods work and they don't harm pollinators. Plant flowers. This seems obvious, but it's incredibly powerful. These need food from early spring until late fall. If everyone planted even a small patch of pollinator-friendly flowers, we would create millions of acres of bee habitat. Native wildflowers are best because they've evolved alongside native bee species. But even non-native flowers can provide valuable nectar and pollen sources. Let parts of your lawn grow wild. I know this goes against everything we've been taught about lawn care. A perfect lawn is supposed to be a uniform green carpet, perfectly mowed without a single dandelion or clover. But that perfect lawn is an ecological desert. Nothing lives there. Nothing feeds there. It's just grass. Now imagine if you let a section of your lawn grow naturally. Dandelions, clover, violets, all the flowers that we've been taught to think of as weeds. These are actually valuable food sources for bees, especially in early spring when few other flowers are blooming. Create bee habitat. This can be as simple as leaving some bare ground for ground nesting bees, or drilling holes in blocks of wood for cavity nesting species. Most people think all bees live in hives, but actually the vast majority of bee species are solitary. They don't make honey, they don't live in colonies. They nest alone in the ground or in hollow stems or in holes in wood. These native bees are incredibly important pollinators and they need our help too. Support local beekeepers, buy local honey. Not just because it tastes better, though it does, but because when you support local beekeepers, you're supporting people who are actively maintaining bee populations in your area. You're helping to keep the tradition of beekeeping alive. You're contributing to local food security. But here's something critical that often gets overlooked. Beekeeping itself needs to evolve. Traditional practices, while time-tested, were developed in a different era. We face different challenges now. We need modern, ecological approaches that prioritize bee health above all else. Can the innovations happening right now in sustainable beekeeping will absolutely amaze you. Modern ecological beekeeping starts with a fundamental shift in perspective. The goal is not to maximize honey production at any cost. The goal is to maintain healthy, thriving bee colonies that can survive without constant human intervention. Honey becomes a bonus, a gift that the bees provide when they have surplus, not something we extract at every opportunity. This means working with natural bee behavior instead of against it. It means allowing bees to build their comb naturally rather than forcing them into artificial foundation. It means letting queens mate naturally rather than artificially inseminating them. It means allowing colonies to swarm, which is their natural method of reproduction, rather than suppressing this instinct to maximize production. Treatment-free beekeeping is gaining momentum. For decades, beekeepers have relied on chemical treatments to control varroa mites, the parasites that have devastated bee populations worldwide. But these treatments have side effects. They weaken bees, they contaminate honey and wax, and worst of all, the mites are developing resistance to these chemicals, making them less effective every year. Treatment-free beekeepers take a different approach. They breed bees that have natural resistance to mites. They create conditions that make colonies stronger and more resilient. They accept that some colonies will fail, but the ones that survive pass on their genetics to the next generation, creating stronger bees over time. It's evolution in action. It's nature doing what nature does best, adapting and surviving. Technology is playing a role too, but in ways that support natural processes rather than replace them. Smart hive monitors can track temperature, humidity, and weight without disturbing the bees. This data helps beekeepers understand what's happening inside the hive without having to open it constantly. Thermal imaging can detect problems early. Acoustic monitoring can identify when a colony is preparing to swarm or when the queen has died. But the most important innovation isn't technological. It's philosophical. It's the growing understanding that bees are not livestock to be exploited. They're wild creatures that we're privileged to work with. They're partners in a relationship that should be mutually beneficial. When we approach beekeeping with this mindset, everything changes. I've seen this shift happen in the beekeeping community over the past decade. More and more people are questioning conventional practices. They're experimenting with natural methods. They're sharing their successes and failures. They're creating a new paradigm for how humans and bees can coexist. And this connects directly to sustainable livestock farming, because the same principles apply. Animals are not production units. They're living beings with their own needs and instincts. Modern ecological farming recognizes this. Chickens are allowed to forage naturally. Cattle are raised on pasture, not in feedlots. Pigs are given space to root and wallow. And crucially, these farms incorporate diverse plant life that supports pollinators. I visited a farm last year that perfectly exemplifies this integration. They raise cattle on rotational pasture, moving them frequently to prevent overgrazing. Behind the cattle, they keep chickens in mobile coops that fertilize the land and control pests. Throughout the pastures, they've planted native wildflowers and clovers that feed both the livestock and the pollinators. And they keep beehives at the edges of the property. Everything works together. The cattle graze the grass. The chickens follow, eating insects and spreading manure. The flowers bloom, feeding the bees. The bees pollinate the flowers, ensuring abundant forage for next year. It's a beautiful cycle. It's regenerative. It builds soil health, increases biodiversity, and produces nutrient-dense food. And the results they're getting are nothing short of extraordinary. You need to hear this. The cattle from this farm are healthier than conventionally raised animals. They require fewer veterinary interventions. They gain weight steadily on nothing but grass and forage. The meat is more nutritious, with higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids and vitamins. Customers can taste the difference. They can see the difference in the deep color of the meat. And they're willing to pay premium prices because they understand the value of food produced this way. The chickens produce eggs with bright orange yolks, a sign of their diverse diet and healthy lifestyle. The shells are thick and strong. The chickens themselves are active and alert, exhibiting natural behaviors that factory-farmed birds never experience. Disease is rare because the animals aren't crowded together in stressful conditions. And the honey from those hives? It's unlike anything you can buy in a supermarket. Each batch tastes different depending on what flowers were blooming. Spring honey is light and floral. Summer honey is rich and complex. Fall honey is dark and robust. It's raw and filtered, full of pollen and enzymes. This is what honey is supposed to be. But here's what really matters. This farm is profitable, not just surviving, but thriving. The farmers make a good living. They're not working themselves to death. They're not drowning in debt. They're not dependent on subsidies. They're proving that ecological farming isn't just idealistic dreaming. It's practical. It's economically viable. It's the future of agriculture. And this model can scale. You don't need thousands of acres to farm this way. Small farms can implement these principles. Urban farms can adapt them. Even large operations can gradually, one field at a time, one practice at a time. The key is diversity. Monoculture is the enemy of ecological farming. When you have only one crop, you create an unstable system that requires constant inputs of pesticides and fertilizers. But when you have diversity, plants and animals and insects all working together, the system becomes self-regulating. Problems solve themselves. Nature finds balance. Think about a natural meadow. Nobody fertilizes it. Nobody sprays it. Nobody manages it. And yet it thrives year after year. Different plants bloom in succession, providing continuous food for pollinators. Predator insects keep pest populations in check. Deep-rooted plants bring up nutrients from the subsoil. Nitrogen-fixing plants enrich the soil. Everything has a role. Everything contributes. That's the model we should be following in agriculture. Not the industrial model of control and domination, but the ecological model of cooperation and integration. And bees are central to this model. They're the connective tissue that holds everything together. They move between plants, between farms, between ecosystems, spreading life wherever they go. Now, let me tell you about something that happened just last month. I was visiting a farm that had recently converted from conventional corn and soybean production to a diverse ecological operation. The transformation took 3 years. In year 1, they stopped using pesticides and started planting cover crops. In year 2, they introduced livestock and began building pollinator habitat. In year 3, they added beehives and diversified their crops. The farmer told me the first year was scary. Yields dropped. Weeds were everywhere. It felt like everything was falling apart. But he stuck with it because he knew the conventional system was killing his land. The soil was dead. Earthworms were gone. By year 3, the land had come back to life. Earthworms returned. Beneficial insects disappeared. Birds nested in the hedgerows. And the bees were everywhere. He said sometimes he would just stand in a field and listen to them. Thousands of them, working the flowers. Asterisk, and what happened to his profits will shock you. His income doubled, even though his yields per acre were slightly lower than conventional farming. His costs had dropped dramatically. No more expensive pesticides. No more synthetic fertilizers. No more paying for expensive hybrid seeds every year. And he was selling his products directly to consumers at premium prices. Grass-fed beef, pasture-raised chicken, organic vegetables, raw honey. People lined up to buy from him. But more than the money, he said something that really struck me. He said he loved farming again. For 20 years, he had hated what he was doing. He was spraying poisons on his land. He was watching the soil degrade. He was trapped in a system that felt wrong. But now, he wakes up excited to work. He's rebuilding something. He's creating life instead of destroying it. He's leaving his children land that will be better than what he inherited. That's the power of ecological farming. It's not just about production. It's not just about profit. It's about purpose. It's about being part of something larger than yourself. It's about working with nature instead of against it. And this brings us back to bees. Because bees represent everything that's right about this approach. They can't be controlled. They can't be fully domesticated. They follow their own instincts, their own patterns. The best we can do is provide them with good habitat, protect them from harm, and step back to let them do what they do best. When we try to control bees too much, they suffer. When we treat them like machines, extracting maximum honey with minimum regard for their well-being, colonies collapse. But when we work with their nature, when we respect their needs, they thrive. And when they thrive, everything around them thrives too. This is the lesson that agriculture needs to learn. Control is an illusion. The industrial farming model is based on the idea that we control nature. bend it to our will, force it to produce what we want regardless of ecological consequences. And for a while, it seemed to work. Production increased, yields went up, food became cheaper. But we're now seeing the true cost of that approach. Degraded soil, polluted water, collapsing bee populations, climate change accelerated by destructive farming practices, loss of biodiversity, and ironically, less nutritious food despite higher yields. The system is breaking down. Ecological farming offers a different path. It's based on cooperation rather than control. It recognizes that we're part of nature, not separate from it. It understands that healthy ecosystems produce abundance naturally, without force, without chemicals, without destroying the foundation of future productivity. And it works all around the world. Farmers are proving it works. In every climate, in every region, with every type of crop and livestock. Ecological methods are producing results. Not just environmental results, but economic results, profitable farms, healthy communities, resilient food systems. The transition isn't always easy. It requires knowledge, it requires patience. It requires a willingness to learn from nature and from other farmers who have walked this path before. But it's possible, and it's necessary. Because here's the truth that we need to face. The current agricultural system is unsustainable. It cannot continue. We're depleting our soil faster than it can regenerate. We're draining aquifers faster than they can recharge. We're losing pollinators faster than they can recover. We're in a trajectory that leads to catastrophe. But we can change course, we can choose a different path. Every farmer who transitions to ecological methods is a step in the right direction. Every person who supports sustainable agriculture with their food choices is contributing to change. Every garden planted with pollinator-friendly flowers is part of the solution. Asterisk, and the next thing I'm going to tell you about will give you hope for the future. There's a movement growing. It's not organized by any single entity. It's not controlled by corporations or governments. It's a grassroots awakening happening in communities everywhere. People are reconnecting with their food. They're questioning where it comes from and how it's produced. They're choosing quality over convenience. They're supporting local farmers who are doing things right. Farmers' markets are flourishing. Community-supported agriculture programs are expanding. Urban farms are sprouting up in empty lots and on rooftops. Schools are teaching children about pollination and sustainable food systems. Restaurants are sourcing ingredients from ecological farms and telling those stories to their customers. This is how change happens, not from the top down, but from the bottom up, one person at a time, one choice at a time, one farm at a time. And bees are at the center of this movement because they're a perfect symbol of what we're fighting for. They represent the interdependence of all life. They show us that we can't separate our well-being from the well-being of the natural world. Let me share another story with you. There's a woman named Sarah who lives in a suburban neighborhood. 3 years ago, she knew nothing about bees. She was scared of them, actually. She would run inside if a bee came near her. But then she attended a talk about pollinator decline and something clicked. She realized these creatures she had always feared were actually in desperate need of help. She started small. She planted a few native wildflowers in her front yard. Her neighbors thought she was crazy. The homeowners association sent her a letter saying her yard was unkempt. But she persisted. She explained what she was doing. She invited neighbors to see the bees and butterflies visiting her flowers. She shared articles about pollinator decline. Something remarkable happened. One neighbor planted flowers. Then another. Within 2 years, half the street had pollinator gardens. The homeowners association changed their rules to encourage native plantings. Children on the street started learning about insects and ecology. The whole community transformed. And Sarah didn't stop there. She took a beekeeping course. She installed the hives in her backyard. She learned everything she could about colony management and bee health. Now she's teaching others. She's become an advocate for changing local ordinances to allow beekeeping in residential areas. She's created something beautiful out of what started as fear. That's the kind of transformation we need to see multiplied millions of times over. Because the problems we face are big, but the solutions are accessible to everyone. You don't need to be a farmer. You don't need acres of land. You don't need special expertise. You just need to care and to act. Plant flowers, stop using pesticides. Support ecological farmers, buy local honey. Talk to your neighbors about what you're learning. Vote for policies that protect pollinators and promote sustainable agriculture. Choose products from companies committed to environmental stewardship. Every action matters. And if you're thinking this sounds overwhelming, if you're wondering whether individual actions can really make a difference, let me remind you of something. A bee colony contains thousands of individual bees. No single bee is responsible for the survival of the colony. But each bee does its part. Each bee collects nectar, builds comb, tends larvae, guards the entrance. And together, through the cumulative effect of those individual efforts, the colony thrives. We're like that. No single person can solve these problems alone. But each of us can do our part. What I'm about to reveal next will change how you see your role in this. You are not just a consumer. You are not just a bystander watching environmental collapse happen. You are a participant in one of the most important transformations in human history. The decisions you make about food, about your yard, about how you spend your money, these aren't trivial choices. They're votes for the kind of world you want to live in. Every time you buy honey from a local beekeeper instead of a plastic bear filled with imported syrup, you're supporting sustainable practices. Every time you choose organic produce, you're telling farmers that you value food grown without pesticides. Every time you let the dandelions bloom in your lawn, you're providing critical early season food for hungry bees emerging from winter. These choices ripple outward in ways you might never see. The beekeeper you support can keep more hives. The organic farmer can convert another field. The bees in your neighborhood can build stronger colonies. And those stronger colonies pollinate more effectively, which means better gardens for everyone, which means more people noticing and appreciating pollinators, which means more gardens, more habitat, more life. This is how ecosystems recover. This is how movements build. This is how we change the world. Now, I want to address something that I hear often when I talk about these issues. People say, isn't it already too late? Haven't we already done too much damage? Can we really reverse acres of environmental destruction? And my answer is always the same. Nature is remarkably resilient. Given half a chance, ecosystems can recover faster than we imagine possible. I've seen it happen. I've seen depleted land come back to life in just a few years. I've seen bee populations rebound when the right conditions are created. I've seen polluted streams run clear again. I've seen forests regrow on abandoned farmland. Life wants to persist. Life wants to thrive. Evolution has equipped organisms with incredible abilities to adapt and survive. What nature needs from us is not heroic intervention. It needs us to stop actively destroying it. It needs us to remove the obstacles we've placed in its way. It needs us to work with it instead of against it. And when we do that, the results can be stunning. There are examples all over the world of ecosystems recovering once destructive practices stopped. Rivers that were declared dead are now teeming with fish. Forests that were clear-cut are regenerating. Species that were on the brink of extinction are coming back. Bees can recover too. Their populations can rebound. But it requires commitment. It requires changing agricultural practices. It requires protecting and restoring habitat. It requires reducing pesticide use. It requires each of us doing our part. The science is clear. We know it needs to be done. The question is whether we have the collective will to do it, whether we care enough to change our habits, whether we're willing to prioritize long-term survival over short-term convenience. I believe we are. I've seen too much evidence of people waking up to these realities. I've seen too many farmers making the transition to ecological methods. I've seen too many communities coming together to protect pollinators. I've seen too much passion and dedication from people who refuse to give up. And I've seen the bees themselves demonstrating incredible resilience. Colonies that should have died surviving against the odds. Feral bee populations thriving without human management in some areas. Native bee species persisting in small pockets of remaining habitat. Life finds a way, but it needs our help. So what does the future look like if we get this right? Imagine with me for a moment. Imagine farms as havens for pollinators. Hedgerows bursting with wildflowers. Pesticides as relics of the past. Soil rich and alive. Food produced in harmony with nature. Can this future is closer than you. Imagine driving through the countryside and seeing not endless monocultures, but diverse landscapes. Fields of different crops creating a patchwork of colors. Strips of wildflowers between plantings. Ponds and wetlands integrated into farms. Livestock grazing peacefully on lush pastures dotted with clover and other flowering plants. And everywhere, the sound of bees. Imagine cities where every rooftop has a garden, where vacant lots have been transformed into urban farms and pollinator meadows, where parks are managed for biodiversity rather than sterile lawns, where school children learn about ecology by observing beehives and tending gardens, where people know the names of the flowers and insects around them. Imagine grocery stores where every product tells a story, where you can trace your food back to the farm where it was grown and the farmer who grew it, where quality matters more than price, where seasonal eating is normal again, where local food is the default, not the exception. This isn't fantasy, this is achievable. Parts of it are already happening. The infrastructure is being built right now by pioneers who refuse to accept that the destructive industrial model is the only way forward. But it requires all of us. It requires farmers willing to change their practices. It requires consumers willing to pay fair prices for food produced responsibly. It requires policymakers willing to support sustainable agriculture with appropriate regulations and incentives. It requires educators teaching the next generation to value and understand natural systems. And it requires beekeepers approaching their craft with humility and respect, recognizing that we're working with wild creatures that have their own needs and imperatives. Understanding that our job is not to dominate bees but to facilitate their success. Learning to read what the bees are telling us through their behavior. I've been keeping bees for over 20 years now, and I'm still learning. Every season teaches me something new. Every colony behaves slightly differently. There are patterns, yes, and principles that generally apply. But there's also mystery. There's magic in how these tiny insects coordinate their activities, how they make collective decisions, how they adapt to changing conditions. Sometimes I open a hive and I'm completely surprised by what I find. A colony I expected to be struggling is thriving. A strong colony has unexpectedly swarmed. The bees have built comb in an unusual pattern. They've stored honey in unexpected places. And I have to stop and think about what they're telling me. What do they know that I don't? What are they responding to that I haven't noticed? This is the attitude we need to bring to all of agriculture. This willingness to listen. This recognition that nature is wiser than we are. This humility in the face of complex systems we don't fully understand. Industrial agriculture operates from arrogance. It assumes we can simplify nature, control it, bend it to our will. It treats the land as a factory floor. It treats plants and animals as production units. It ignores inconvenient truths about soil depletion and water pollution and biodiversity loss. Ecological agriculture operates from respect. It recognizes that we're part of nature, not separate from it. It seeks to understand and work with natural processes rather than override them. It values diversity and complexity. It prioritizes long-term health over short-term gains. And the beautiful thing is, this approach doesn't require sacrifice. It doesn't mean producing less food or accepting lower standards. It means producing better food more sustainably while creating healthier ecosystems and more resilient communities. Asterisk if you want to be part of this transformation. If you want to stay informed about sustainable agriculture and pollinator protection, you need to subscribe and hit that like button. We need to spread this information as widely as possible. The knowledge exists, the techniques have been proven. What we need now is momentum. We need more people understanding these connections. We need more people demanding change. We need more people taking action in their own lives and communities. And that's where you come in. You're not powerless in this. You have more influence than you probably realize. Your choices matter, your voice matters, your actions matter. Start today, right now, before this presentation ends. Commit to one action you're going to take. Maybe it's planting a pollinator garden. Maybe it's finding a local beekeeper to buy honey from. Maybe it's talking to your local government about pesticide policies. Maybe it's starting a compost pile or joining a community garden. Maybe it's just paying more attention to the bees and other pollinators around you. Whatever it is, do something, because the accumulation of millions of small actions is how we create massive change. That's how movements happen. That's how systems transform. And speaking of transformation, let me tell you about the most remarkable thing I've witnessed in all my years of beekeeping. I was working with a colony that had been struggling. The queen was old and not laying well. The population was declining. Mites were becoming a problem. By all conventional wisdom, I should have killed the queen and replaced her with a young one purchased from a breeder. But I decided to let the bees handle it themselves. I wanted to see what they would do. And what happened was extraordinary. The workers sensed the queen was failing. They began building special queen cells. They selected the youngest larvae and fed them royal jelly, a special food that transforms an ordinary larva into a queen. Multiple queen cells were built. Multiple potential queens developing simultaneously. The first queen to emerge went immediately to the other queen cells and destroyed them. She killed her sisters before they could hatch. This sounds brutal, but it's necessary. A hive can only have one queen. Then this virgin queen took her mating flights. She flew out of the hive up into the sky, where drones from other colonies were congregating. She mated with multiple drones, gathering enough sperm to last her entire lifetime of egg laying. She returned to the hive transformed. Within days, she was laying eggs. Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. The colony exploded with new life. The population surged. The bees became vigorous and productive again. They had saved themselves. They had perpetuated their line. And the new queen had the genetics of that specific colony, adapted to that specific location, proven survivors. If I had intervened with a purchased queen, I would have broken the genetic line. I would have introduced genes from bees bred in a completely different environment for different traits. The colony might have survived, but it wouldn't have been the same. It wouldn't have had that continuity, that adaptation, that resilience that comes from natural selection. This is the power of working with nature instead of against it. This is what we give up when we try to control everything. We give up nature's wisdom, evolution's testing, the deep knowledge embedded in biological systems refined over millions of years. The same principle applies to agriculture broadly. When we plant diverse crops, we're letting nature's pest control work. When we build healthy soil, we're letting nature's nutrient cycling work. When we integrate animals, we're letting nature's fertilization work. When we protect pollinators, we're letting nature's reproduction work. Every time we work with nature, we get better results with less effort. Every time we fight nature, we work harder just to maintain production while causing increasing damage. Asterisk, and the evidence for this approach is overwhelming. What comes next will give you a completely new perspective. If you take anything away from this extra hour today, let it be this: bees don't need us to know more, they need us to understand them better. Do you know that in the next 30 years, the way we produce our food will change more radically than in the last 300 years combined? And if you don't stay until the end of this video, you'll miss why this affects you directly, even if you've never seen a bee up close. What you're about to hear isn't just about beekeeping. It's about your future, your food, and the world you'll leave to the next generations. Today we're going to talk about the future of beekeeping, but not in the traditional way you probably expect. We're going to explore how this ancient craft is being transformed by the climate crisis, technology, and a new generation of beekeepers who are rewriting the rules of the game. I promise you that by the end of this talk, you'll never look at a bee or your plate of food the same way again. Let me start with a confession. 20 years ago, when I began in this world, I thought beekeeping was simply about producing honey. You placed your hives in the field, the bees did their work, and you harvested the liquid gold. Simple, right? How wrong I was. The first time I really understood what beekeeping meant was on a cold March morning in 2004. I had lost 30% of my colonies over the winter. 30%. I remember standing there, surrounded by silent hives, feeling like I had failed. But that morning changed everything for me, because I realized that beekeeping wasn't about controlling nature. It was about understanding it, respecting it, and working with it. That's when my real education began. And that's exactly what I want to share with you, not theories from a textbook, but real experiences, hard lessons, and hope for what's coming next. You see, we're living through the most critical moment in the history of pollination. The bees are telling us something. They've been telling us for years, but are we listening? Climate change isn't some distant threat anymore. It's here, it's in every hive I open. Last spring, I witnessed something I'd never seen in 2 decades of beekeeping. My colonies started their spring build-up in February. That's a full month earlier than normal. You might think that's good news. More time for the bees to grow, right, Ron? When the bees emerge early, but the flowers aren't blooming yet, disaster follows. The colony burns through its winter stores expecting nectar that isn't there. It's like waking up starving and finding your refrigerator empty. Now multiply that by thousands of hives across entire regions. But here's what keeps me up at night, and what should matter to you. Even if you don't keep bees, 1/3 of everything you eat depends on pollinators. 1/3, the apple in your lunch, pollinated by bees. The almonds in your morning cereal, bees. The coffee you can't live without, you guessed it, bees. And we're losing them, not slowly, rapidly. The statistics are staggering. In some regions, beekeepers are reporting losses of 40, 50, even 60% of their colonies each year. Imagine if 60% of cattle died every winter. There would be a global emergency declared. But because bees are small and we don't see them every day, we somehow think it's less urgent. It's not. This is where modern ecological beekeeping comes in. And this is where everything I'm about to tell you gets interesting. Because we're not just talking about saving bees anymore. We're talking about redesigning our entire food system from the ground up. Let me paint you a picture of what ecological beekeeping actually means. Because it's not what most people think. Traditional beekeeping, the kind practiced for centuries, worked beautifully in a stable climate with diverse landscapes. But our world isn't stable anymore. The old methods, as romantic as they are, aren't enough. And industrial beekeeping, the kind that treats bees like machines, is actively making things worse. Ecological beekeeping is different. It's about creating resilient systems that work with nature, not against it. It's about understanding that a healthy bee colony is worth more than the honey it produces. It's about biodiversity, soil health, and integration with other forms of sustainable agriculture. Here's a real example from my own operation. 5 years ago, I made a decision that many people thought was crazy. I reduced my number of hives by half. Yes, you heard that right. I cut my operation in half. My fellow beekeepers thought I'd lost my mind. Why would anyone voluntarily produce less honey? But here's what happened. Instead of cramming hives into every available space, I spread them out. I planted wildflower quarters between my apiaries. I stopped treating my bees with synthetic chemicals and started focusing on breeding strong, resilient colonies. I integrated my hives with a local regenerative farm that raises sheep and chickens. The first year, my honey production dropped. I won't lie about that, but by year 3, something remarkable happened. My winter losses went from 35% down to 12%. 12%, my colonies were healthier, stronger, more productive, and the honey, the quality was unlike anything I'd produced before. But the real revelation came from an unexpected source. The farmer I was working with noticed something. His pastures were more productive. His soil tests showed improvement. The sheep were healthier. Why? Because the diverse wildflowers I'd planted for the bees were enriching his pastures. The bees were pollinating plants that fed the soil microbiome. Everything was connected. This is what I mean by ecological beekeeping. It's not just about the bees. It's about building integrated systems where everything supports everything else. The bees support the plants support the soil supports the livestock through their grazing patterns, support the plants. It's a circle, not a line. And this brings me to something crucial that I need you to understand. Asterisk, stay with me here, because what I'm about to explain will change how you think about food production forever. We've been taught to think about agriculture in compartments. Here's where we grow crops. Here's where we raise animals. Here's where we keep bees. Each one separate, specialized, optimized for maximum output. But nature doesn't work in compartments. Nature works in systems, and when we try to fight that, we lose. I learned this lesson the hard way. In my early years, I had an apiary next to a conventional cornfield. Every year, like clockwork, I'd lose colonies right after the farmer sprayed his crops. I'd complain. He'd shrug. We were both trapped in a system that pitted us against each other. Then I met Maria. She was a young farmer, fresh out of agricultural school. But she had ideas that were old as dirt. Literally, she talked about soil health like it was a living thing. She rotated her crops with cover crops. She integrated small numbers of cattle into her crop rotation. And she wanted bees, lots of them. We struck a deal. I'd place hives on her farm. And in exchange, she'd plant pollinator strips and manage her land without synthetic pesticides. I was skeptical. How could she farm without chemicals and still make money? 3 years later, her farm was producing more food per acre than her conventional neighbors. More food, better soil, higher profits. And my bees, they were thriving. Her farm had become an oasis in a desert of monoculture. This is the model we need to be moving towards. Not bigger farms with more chemicals and fewer species, but integrated operations where diversity is strength, where every element supports the others. where ecological principles drive decision-making. Now, let me tell you about something that's happening right now in cities around the world that most people have no idea about. Urban beekeeping. And before you roll your eyes, thinking this is just a hipster trend, let me explain why this matters more than you. Cities are becoming refuges for pollinators. I know that sounds backwards. How can concrete jungles be better for bees than the countryside? But it's true, and the reasons are both fascinating and deeply troubling. In many agricultural areas, the landscape has become so simplified, so dominated by single crops, that there's nothing for bees to eat for most of the year. A field of almonds blooms for 3 weeks, then nothing. Canola for a month, then nothing. It's like living in a restaurant that's only open 1 month a year. But cities are surprisingly diverse. Parks, gardens, street trees, balcony planters. Someone is always growing something. There's always something blooming. And here's the kicker: studies are showing that urban bees often have lower pesticide exposure than rural bees. Think about that for a moment. I started my urban beekeeping project 7 years ago on a rooftop in Manchester. People thought I was insane. Who keeps bees in the middle of a city? But that first season taught me something profound. Those urban colonies thrived. They had access to diverse forage year-round. The urban heat tile in effect actually extended their foraging season, and the local community embraced them. But urban beekeeping isn't just about producing honey in cities. It's about education. It's about reconnecting people with where their food comes from. It's about creating green corridors through concrete landscapes. Every rooftop garden, every pollinator-friendly park, every balcony full of flowers becomes part of a network supporting not just honeybees, but all pollinators. I'll never forget the day a school teacher contacted me. She wanted to start a hive at her primary school. I was hesitant at first, kids and bees? But she convinced me, and we set up an observation hive where students could watch the colony without getting stung. The transformation in those kids was incredible. Suddenly, they cared about flowers. They noticed butterflies. They asked questions about ecosystems and climate change. One 10-year-old started a campaign to get her apartment building to plant a rooftop garden. That's the power of urban beekeeping. It creates ambassadors. It makes the invisible visible. It connects abstract environmental concerns with something tangible you can see and taste. But let's be clear about something. Urban beekeeping alone won't save the bees. It's part of a larger puzzle. And that puzzle includes some uncomfortable truths about biodiversity loss that we need to face head-on. Here's something most people don't realize. When we talk about saving the bees, most people think about honeybees. But honeybees are actually just one species. There are over 20,000 species of bees in the world. 20,000. And many of them are in far worse trouble than honeybees. Solitary bees, bumblebees, mining bees, carpenter bees. These native pollinators are often more efficient at pollinating certain crops than honeybees. But they don't make honey, so they don't get the attention. They don't have beekeepers advocating for them. They're disappearing silently. I remember the first time I truly understood this. I was walking through what used to be a wildflower meadow near my childhood home. It had been converted to a golf course. Perfectly manicured grass as far as the eye could see. Beautiful in a sterile sort of way. But silent, no buzz, no movement. The bumblebees that used to nest in the unmowed edges were gone. The mining bees that emerged every spring from the bare soil patches had nowhere to live. That's when I realized that saving pollinators isn't just about managing honeybee hives better. It's about protecting habitat. It's about leaving wild spaces wild. It's about understanding that a messy garden is often healthier than a perfect one. This is where modern ecological approaches become crucial. We need to think beyond honeybees. We need to create landscapes that support all pollinators. That means diverse plantings. That means leaving dead wood for cavity nesting bees. That means bare soil patches for ground nesting species. That means accepting that not every square meter needs to be productive in the conventional sense. I've started incorporating this thinking into my own land management. Instead of mowing everything, I leave sections wild. I have log piles and brush piles. I have areas of bare ground. My neighbors think it looks messy. But you know what? It's alive. It's buzzing with activity. And that diversity is supporting my honeybees too. Because here's the thing about biodiversity. It's not just nice to have. It's essential for resilience. A system with only one or two species is fragile. When conditions change, when disease strikes, when climate shifts, that system collapses. But a diverse system, it bends, it adapts, it survives. This principle applies to everything in ecological agriculture. Diverse crop rotations are more resilient than monocultures. Integrated livestock systems are more stable than specialized operations. And diverse pollinator populations are more reliable than depending on a single species. Let me share something that happened just last year that perfectly illustrates this point. We had an unusually cold, wet spring. My honeybees could barely fly for 3 weeks straight. If I were a farmer depending entirely on honeybee pollination, I would have been in serious trouble. But you know what I noticed? The bumblebees were still out there working. They can fly in colder temperatures than honeybees. The native mason bees were active too. Between them, they got the job done. That's resilience. That's why biodiversity matters. Not for some abstract environmental reason, but for very practical, economic survival reasons. Now, I want to shift gears and talk about something that makes many traditional beekeepers uncomfortable. Technology, because the future of beekeeping isn't just about going back to old methods. It's about combining traditional wisdom with modern tools and smart ways. I resisted technology for years. I was a purist. I thought real beekeeping meant doing everything by hand, by instinct, the way it had always been done. But I was wrong, not completely wrong, but wrong enough that it was limiting what I could achieve. The turning point came when I lost an entire apiary to a disease outbreak that I didn't catch in time. 30 hives, gone. If I had been monitoring them more closely, if I had caught the signs earlier, I could have saved most of them. But I was managing over 200 hives spread across multiple locations. I couldn't inspect every hive every week. It was physically impossible. That's when I started exploring technology. Not to replace my skills and judgment, but to enhance them. To give me information I couldn't get otherwise. I started with simple hive scales. They measure the weight of the hive continuously. Suddenly, I could see exactly when the nectar flow started and stopped. I could see if a hive was consuming stores too quickly. I could detect swarming before it happened because the weight would drop suddenly. This one simple tool transformed my understanding of what was happening inside my hives. Then I added temperature sensors. Inside the hive, bees maintain a very specific temperature in the brood area, around 35 degrees Celsius. If that temperature drops or fluctuates, something is wrong. The queen might be failing. The colony might be weak. The four sensors. I'd only discover these problems when I open the hive, which might be weeks too late. Now I get alerts on my phone. But here's what's important. Technology doesn't replace the beekeeper. It empowers the beekeeper to make better decisions. I still need to understand bee biology. I still need to know what actions to take based on the data. The sensors tell me what to look closer, but they don't tell me what to do about what I find. This is where a lot of people get technology wrong in agriculture. They think it's about automation, about removing the human element. It's not. It's about augmenting human judgment with better information. It's about working smarter, not just harder. I've seen operations where they've installed thousands of dollars of sensors, but don't understand their bees well enough to interpret the data. That's useless. But when you combine deep knowledge with good data, that's powerful. Let me give you another example. Varroa mites. These parasites are one of the biggest threats to honeybees worldwide. For decades, beekeepers have been treating them with chemicals, but the mites are developing resistance. The treatments are becoming less effective, and the chemicals themselves can harm the bees and contaminate the honey. The old approach was to treat on a schedule. Every fall, apply treatment, but that's crude. It's like taking antibiotics whether you're sick or not. The new approach uses monitoring technology. You can count mite levels precisely. You can track treatment effectiveness in real time. You can make decisions based on actual infestation levels rather than assumptions. And here's the crucial part: you can breed for resistance. This is where genetics and technology intersect with traditional beekeeping. For thousands of years, beekeepers have selected their best colonies to breed from. But best for what? Usually honey production or general temperament. Now we can select for mite resistance, for disease resistance, for climate adaptability. I'm part of a breeding cooperative where we're selecting for bees that can groom mites off themselves. It's a natural behavior that some colonies exhibit more strongly than others. By carefully tracking which colonies have this trait and breeding from them, we're creating populations that need fewer treatments. This isn't genetic modification. This is selective breeding, the same process humans have used for 10,000 years to domesticate crops and animals. But now we have tools to do it more precisely, more quickly, more effectively. And this is crucial because climate change is accelerating. We don't have centuries to adapt. We need bees that can handle temperature extremes. We need bees that can cope with shifted flowering times. We need bees that are resilient to new pests and diseases that are moving into new territories as the climate warms. This is happening right now, by the way. Pests that used to be killed off by cold winters are now surviving year-round in areas where they never could before. New diseases are appearing. Flowering patterns are shifting. If we rely only on the bees we have now, without actively selecting for adaptability, we're going to lose. But here's the hopeful part. Bees are incredibly adaptable. They've survived ice ages and warm periods. They've spread to every continent except Antarctica. They have the genetic diversity to handle change. Our job is to help them access that diversity, to give them the best chance to adapt. This is what modern ecological beekeeping looks like. It's not romantic, it's not simple, but it's effective, and it's necessary. Now, let me talk about something that bridges everything I've discussed so far. The integration of beekeeping with regenerative livestock farming. This is where the future really gets interesting, and where I've seen the most dramatic results. Most people think of beekeeping and livestock farming as completely separate activities. You have your bee guy and your cattle rancher, and never the two shall meet. But this separation is artificial and counterproductive. I started working with a regenerative grazing operation 3 years ago. The farmer, Tom, rotates his cattle through small paddocks, moving them every day or two. This mimics how wild herbivores used to move across landscapes, grazing intensively but briefly, then moving on. It gives the plants time to recover and actually stimulates growth. When I first proposed putting hives on his land, Tom was skeptical. He worried the cattle would knock over the hives. I worried the cattle would eat all the flowers. We were both wrong. What actually happened was synergy. The cattle's grazing stimulated flowering in the pasture plants. Clover, which might bloom once in an unmowed pasture, would bloom multiple times when grazed correctly. The bees had more forage. The cattle got better nutrition from the diverse pasture, and the whole system became more productive. But it goes deeper than that. The cattle's manure feeds the soil. Healthy soil grows more diverse plants. Diverse plants support more pollinators. More pollinators mean better seed production. Better seed production means more forage for the cattle. It's a virtuous cycle. We started measuring things. Soil organic matter increased by 2% in 3 years. That might not sound like much, but it's huge. Each percentage point of organic matter means the soil can hold thousands more gallons of water per acre. In an era of increasing droughts and floods, that water holding capacity is gold. The plant diversity increased too. Species that hadn't been seen on that land in decades started reappearing. Not because we planted them, but because their seeds had been lying dormant in the soil, waiting for the right conditions. The right conditions turned out to be diverse grazing patterns and reduced chemical inputs. And here's what really blew my mind. Tom's veterinary bills dropped by 40%. 40%. His cattle were healthier. Why? Because they were eating a more diverse diet with more medicinal plants. Because they were moving more, which is what cattle are built to do. Because the whole system was healthier. And health is contagious just like diseases. This is the model we should be moving toward everywhere. Not separated, specialized operations, but integrated systems where each component supports the others. It's more complex to manage. It requires more knowledge. But it's more resilient, more productive, and more profitable in the long run. I've seen this pattern repeated across different operations now. Bees with pastured chickens, bees with sheep, bees with pigs in orchards. Every time, the integration creates benefits that neither operation would see alone. And this matters for climate change too. These integrated systems sequester carbon. They build soil instead of depleting it. They're working with natural cycles instead of fighting them. They're part of the solution instead of part of the problem. Let me get specific about carbon for a moment, because this is important. Conventional agriculture is a significant source of greenhouse gas emissions. Tilling releases carbon from the soil. Synthetic fertilizers require enormous amounts of energy to produce. Pesticides and herbicides have their own carbon footprint. Transportation, processing, all of it adds up. But regenerative systems can actually be carbon negative. The plants pull carbon from the air through photosynthesis. Some of that carbon goes into the soil through root exudates and decomposition. If you're building soil organic matter, you're sequestering carbon. You're pulling it out of the atmosphere and storing it underground. Tom's operation is now sequestering an estimated 15 tons of carbon per year per 100 acres. He's being paid for carbon credits. His cattle operation is actually fighting climate change while producing food. That's not theoretical. That's happening right now. And the bees, they're essential to the whole thing. Because without pollinators, you don't get the plant diversity. Without plant diversity, you don't get the deep root systems that build soil. Without healthy soil, the whole system falls apart. This is why I say that beekeeping matters even if you never eat honey. The bees are keystones, remove them, and the whole arch collapses. Asterisk asterisk if you're finding this valuable. If you want to learn more about these connections between beekeeping, agriculture, and climate solutions, please subscribe and hit that like button. This is the kind of content I'm passionate about sharing, and your support helps me reach more people who need to hear this message. Now, I want to address something that might be on your mind. This all sounds great in theory, but is it practical? Can it scale? Can it feed the world? These are fair questions, and the answer is yes, but not in the way most people think. We're not going back to everyone having a small mixed farm. That's not realistic and probably not even desirable. But we can move toward more integrated operations at various scales. We can have large-scale regenerative ranches. We can have urban food forests. We can have suburban gardens that contribute to local food security. The key is diversity of approaches matched to local conditions. What works in California won't work in Scotland. What works on 10 acres won't work on 10,000. But the principles remain the same. Work with nature. Build soil, support biodiversity, integrate systems. I've consulted with operations ranging from backyard beekeepers to commercial apiaries managing 10,000 hives. The scale changes, but the fundamentals don't. Healthy bees need diverse forage, clean water, minimal chemical exposure, and good genetics. Whether you have two hives or 2,000, those needs remain constant. What does change at scale is the systems you need to manage complexity. A hobbyist with 5 hives can remember the history of each colony. A commercial operator needs databases and tracking systems. But both need to understand bee biology and behavior. Let me tell you about one of the most successful scaled operations I've seen. It's in New Zealand. They run 4,000 hives across regenerative farmland. They're producing manuka honey. But that's almost secondary to what they're really doing. They've created a landscape-level system. They worked with 20 different landowners to plant corridors of native plants connecting forest fragments. These corridors provide year-round forage for the bees and habitat for native wildlife. The landowners benefit from improved pollination of their crops and pastures. The whole region benefits from improved biodiversity and ecosystem health. The operation uses technology extensively. Every hive is a QR code. Every inspection is logged digitally. They track genetics, health metrics, production data, but they also employ experienced beekeepers who understand the bees intimately. The technology serves the beekeepers, not the other way around. And they're profitable. Very profitable. Because they're producing premium honey. Yes, but also because their costs are lower. Healthier bees mean fewer treatments. Better forage means less supplemental feeding. Integration with the land means the land supports the bees and the bees support the land. This is proof of concept at scale. It can be done, it is being done. But I'm not going to pretend it's easy. The transition from conventional to ecological management is challenging. You're changing established systems. You're learning new approaches. There's often a transition period where things get harder before they get easier. When I first stopped using synthetic treatments in my hives, my losses increased for 2 years. It was brutal. I questioned my decision constantly. But I stuck with it, kept selecting the strongest colonies, kept improving my management. By year 3, my losses were below where they'd been with treatments. And I had bees that could survive without chemical crutches. That transition period scares people. It scared me. But here's what I learned: the conventional system is failing anyway. Winter losses keep increasing despite more and more treatments. The old approach isn't working, so the question isn't whether to change, it's when and how. The beekeepers who are thriving right now, who are excited about the future, are the ones who've embraced ecological principles. The ones still trying to make the old industrial model work are struggling and burning out. This applies beyond beekeeping too. The farmers making money and building resilient operations are the ones thinking about soil health and integration. The ones doubling down on monocultures and chemical inputs are on a treadmill that keeps going faster. Change is happening whether we want it or not. Climate change is forcing our hand. The question is whether we'll manage that change proactively or react to crisis after crisis. And this brings me to urban beekeeping's role in all of this. Because cities are where most people live now. If we're going to build support for the changes agriculture needs, urban populations need to understand what's at stake. Urban beekeeping creates that connection. When people see bees in their city, when they taste honey from their neighborhood, when they watch a hive being opened at a community garden, something shifts, the abstract becomes concrete. Climate change isn't just polar bears anymore. It's the bees on their rooftops struggling with shifted seasons. I've seen this transformation hundreds of times. Someone takes a beekeeping class out of curiosity. Within months, they're planting pollinator gardens, attending city council meetings about pesticide use, shopping differently at the grocery store. The bees become a gateway to broader environmental awareness, and cities are starting to respond. I'm seeing more and more urban policies that support pollinators. Green roofs, pesticide-free parks, native plant requirements in new developments. These changes benefit all pollinators, not just honeybees. London has created pollinator corridors across the entire city. Paris has banned pesticides in public spaces. Copenhagen has green roofs on bus stops. These aren't small pilot projects anymore. These are citywide transformations driven by recognition that urban biodiversity matters. But urban beekeeping has to be done responsibly. Just dumping hives on every rooftop isn't the answer. You can actually have too many honeybees in an area, which can outcompete native pollinators for resources. Urban beekeeping needs to be part of a broader strategy that includes habitat creation and support for all pollinators. This is where education becomes crucial. Every urban beekeeper should understand they're stewarding more than just their hives. They're part of an urban ecosystem. Their decisions affect wild bees, butterflies, birds, and the broader community. I require everyone who places hives through my urban program to commit to planning pollinator habitat and learning about native bees. The goal isn't maximum honey production. The goal is creating resilient urban ecosystems that support diverse life. And you know what? When you approach it this way, the honey production takes care of itself. My urban hives produce just as much as my rural ones, sometimes more because they have access to such diverse forage. There's something else happening in cities that excites me tremendously. Vertical farms and rooftop gardens are becoming more common. Many of these operations want bees for pollination. We're starting to see integrated urban food production systems that include vegetables, herbs, small livestock, and bees all in repurposed urban spaces. I worked with a project in Detroit where they converted an abandoned factory into a food production facility. Tilapia in tanks on the ground floor. The nutrient-rich water from the fish tanks irrigates vegetables growing in vertical systems. Bees pollinate the crops. Black soldier fly larvae process organic waste and become fish food. It's a closed-loop system producing food in the middle of a food desert. Is it going to feed the whole city? No, but it's employing local people, providing fresh produce to a neighborhood that had none, educating kids about food systems, and proving that urban food production can work. These experiments matter because as climate change intensifies, as transportation becomes more expensive, as supply chains prove fragile, local food production becomes more critical. Cities can't be completely self-sufficient, but they can be far more productive than they are now. And every rooftop garden, every urban farm, every pollinator corridor makes cities more resilient, not just for food production, but for climate adaptation. Green infrastructure manages stormwater. Plants cool neighborhoods during heat waves. Biodiverse spaces support mental health and community well-being. The bees are part of all of this. They're not the whole solution, but they're an essential thread in the fabric we're weaving. Now, let me talk about something we haven't addressed directly yet but has been underlying everything I've said. Loss, grief. Because if you care about bees, if you care about nature, you're going to experience loss in this era. I've lost count of how many colonies I've lost over the years. Each one hurts. You invest time, care, hope into these creatures, and then they're gone, collapsed from disease, starved from mist and weather, poisoned by pesticides drifting from neighboring fields. There are mornings when I've opened hive after hive to find them dead, and I've had to sit down and cry. Grown man crying over bees, but they're not just bees. They're indicators, they're warnings. They're dying because we've broken something fundamental in how we relate to the natural world. And I'm not alone in this grief. I talk to beekeepers worldwide, and this theme comes up constantly. The emotional toll of watching populations decline, of fighting harder each year just to maintain what we have, of knowing that what we're doing isn't enough. But here's what I've learned about that grief. You can let it paralyze you, or you can let it motivate you. You can give up, or you can fight harder. And the fight isn't just about keeping your own bees alive. It's about changing the systems that are killing them. This is why I speak at city councils about pesticide policies. Why I work with farmers on integrated pest management. Why I teach classes and give talks like this one. Because individual action isn't enough. We need systemic change. And systemic change requires people to understand what's at stake. It requires people to care. That's hard when the crisis is invisible to most people. When someone's biggest daily concern is traffic or headlines, not pollinator decline, how do you make them care? You connect it to what they already care about. Their food, their children's future. The beauty they notice when they slow down enough to see it. The taste of real honey. The buzz of a garden in summer. You make the invisible visible. You bring people into the hives. You let them taste the difference between honey from diverse forage and honey from monocultures. You show them the empty fields and the full gardens. You let them fall in love because people protect what they love. I've brought thousands of people into contact with bees over the years. School kids, corporate executives, retired teachers, young parents. And almost without exception, something changes in them when they see inside a hive for the first time. The organization, the cooperation, the purposefulness of it all. Thousands of individuals working together toward common goals without any central authority directing them. It's profound. It challenges our assumptions about intelligence, about consciousness, about what matters. People often ask me, bees are intelligent. It's the wrong question. Individual bees have tiny brains, but the colony as a whole exhibits intelligent behavior, decision-making, problem-solving, adaptation. The intelligence emerges from the collective. There's a less in there for us. Individual actions matter, but collective action is what changes systems. One person planting a pollinator garden is nice. 1,000 people doing it transforms a landscape. One farmer going regenerative is inspiring. A movement of farmers doing it changes agriculture. This is why community matters so much in this work. The beekeepers I know who last, who don't burn out, are the ones connected to communities. Local beekeeping associations, farming networks, environmental groups. They're not isolated. They're part of something larger than themselves. I'm part of a regenerative agriculture network that includes beekeepers, farmers, ranchers, researchers, and educators. We share knowledge. We support each other through failures. We celebrate successes together. We're building something that's bigger than any of us individually. And that network is global now. I'm in regular contact with beekeepers in Kenya working on forest conservation, with farmers in India integrating bees with traditional crops, with researchers in Brazil studying native stingless bees, with urban farmers in Japan creating rooftop ecosystems. The challenges we face are global, but the solutions are often local. What we're doing is sharing knowledge so each community can adapt approaches to their specific context. There's no one-size-fits-all answer, but there are principles that work everywhere. Those principles, again, are work with nature, not against it. Build soil, support diversity, integrate systems, think long-term, value resilience over maximum short-term production, treat animals and insects as partners, not resources to be exploited. These aren't new principles. Indigenous peoples have practiced them for thousands of years. Traditional farmers understood them. We've just forgotten in our rush to industrialize everything. But we're remembering, and not a moment too soon. Let me talk about timeline for a moment, because I think it's important to be realistic about where we are and where we're headed. Climate models suggest we have maybe a decade to make major changes before certain tipping points become irreversible. A decade? That sounds like a long time until you realize how long it takes to transform agricultural systems. It took me 5 years to fully transition my beekeeping operation to ecological management. 5 years of learning, adapting, making mistakes, refining approaches. And that's just one small operation. Transforming agriculture globally? That's a generational project. But we don't have generations, we have years. This is why rapid knowledge sharing is so critical. We can't afford for every farmer and beekeeper to spend 5 years figuring out what others already know. We need to compress learning curves. We need to share failures as openly as successes so others don't repeat our mistakes. This is one reason I'm so committed to education and outreach. Every person I teach is someone who might teach others. Every farmer I help transition is a demonstration site for neighbors. Every urban hive is a conversation starter. We're building momentum, and momentum matters when you're racing against time. But I'm not going to lie to you and say we're winning. Right now, we're losing. Pollinator populations continue to decline. Soil continues to degrade. The climate continues to warm. The industrial agricultural system continues to expand. But we're losing slower than we were. The rate of change is accelerating in the right direction. More farmers are transitioning to regenerative practices. More cities are implementing pollinator-friendly policies. More consumers are demanding sustainably produced food. More investors are funding ecological agriculture. The question is whether we can accelerate fast enough, and that depends on people, on you, and whether this message resonates enough that you change something in your life. Plant something, buy differently, vote differently, talk to others, support policies that help. Because here's the truth: I can manage my bees as ecologically as possible. But if my neighbor is spraying neonicotinoids, my bees are still at risk. I can create perfect habitat. But if climate change shifts flowering times faster than the bees can adapt, we're still in trouble. Individual responsibility is necessary but not sufficient. We need collective action. We need policy changes. We need economic incentives that reward regeneration instead of extraction. We need education systems that teach ecological literacy. We need a fundamental shift in how we value food and farming. That sounds overwhelming. It is overwhelming. But it's also happening, bit by bit. Farm by farm, city by city, the transformation is underway. Let me give you some concrete examples of hope. Because we need hope to sustain this work. In France, there's a movement called Terres des Liens that's preserving farmland and helping young farmers access land to practice ecological agriculture. They've protected over 200 farms so far. Each one is a node in a growing network of regenerative operations. In the United States, the Savory Institute is working with ranchers on millions of acres to implement holistic grazing management. They're sequestering carbon, building soil, and proving that regenerative ranching is economically viable. In Ethiopia, beekeepers are protecting forests by creating value from forest products like honey. Communities that might have cut trees for charcoal are instead managing forests for bee forage. It's forest conservation through economic incentive. In Australia, urban farming initiatives are transforming cities. Melbourne has a goal of becoming a productive urban landscape where food production is integrated throughout the city. These aren't small pilot projects anymore. These are movements. They're growing. They're proving that alternatives to industrial agriculture work, and the data is backing them up. Long-term studies are showing that regenerative farms are more profitable than conventional ones when you account for all costs. They're more resilient to weather extremes. They produce more nutritious food. They sequester carbon. They support biodiversity. The economic case for ecological agriculture is becoming undeniable. That matters because money talks. When regenerative approaches are more profitable, more people will adopt them.